I guess I was raised in the school that becoming a leader meant becoming continually all things, right? This is a good thing if you're trying to get individually better as a leader. It's a journey you should never get off of, but let's face it, you're never done. It's like being a parent or a doctor. When do you say, I'm done being a parent because I'm perfect, or a doctor because I know everything? We're done. That's arrogance, not success, right?
I have claimed I'm done being a parent, not because I'm perfect, but for
Because you're done.
for other reasons. But that's beside the point.
Yeah, so it's really about accessing resource and multiplying that resource whenever and wherever within you, and then even getting that multiplying idea to multiply.
Yeah, totally.
Because now you're nonlinear. These big problems you can now tackle without getting exhausted.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the hottest and most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. As many of our listeners know by now, this podcast began out of the idea that CMOs are often on the front lines of any number of natural and man-made disasters and must activate their skills in crisis management tools in order to be effective regarding the well-being of both physicians and patients under their purview. Unfortunately, and in spite of multiple occurrences of floods, hurricanes, wildfires, pandemics, epidemics, cyber attacks, power outages, and financial disasters, there is no educational program to share all of these learned lessons for CMOs who have yet to experience these things. So I have labored to bring this podcast to you, and I have repeatedly brought physician and non-physician leaders to the show to share their insights into the most important topics facing CMOs today. Today's guest is no exception to this effort, a man who has coined the phrase epidemic leadership. Dr. Larry McEvoy grew up in Montana and earned his Bachelor's of Arts at Carroll College in Montana, and then earned his medical degree from Stanford University before completing his residency in emergency medicine at Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. From 1995 to 2008, Dr. McEvoy was a senior executive and emergency physician at the famous Billings Clinic in Billings, Montana, and in 2008, he stepped up and possibly stepped in deep to serve as the CEO of Memorial Health System in Colorado Springs, Colorado, an at-risk and unfunded municipal hospital, and led a massive turnaround effort transforming the hospital toward a successful merger with the University of Colorado. Among several other incredible founder and advisory roles, Dr. McEvoy created Epidemic Leadership, a firm focusing on supporting teams, organizations, and coalitions who seek to learn new rules and to create bigger impacts in challenging environments. Dr. McEvoy is also the author of Epidemic Leadership, How to Lead in the Era of Big Problems, an essential read for leaders who seek to scale efficacy and accelerate results in today's fractious and charged environments. The book was published in 2021 and highlights how we need some new language, some new thinking, new action, and a new approach to leadership to meet today's challenges. So with that, Dr. Larry McEvoy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Lee, it's great to be here. I love the title of the podcast is fantastic. And I think apropos not just for CMOs everywhere, but anybody who's trying to lead these days, right? There are a lot of fires popping up in a lot of places and they bring a lot of heat.
Yep, that's why we call it the fire chief. You know, you start out as a firefighter, you know, and then you put on the big boy shoes and become a fire chief. And if you're really lucky, you can become a fire marshal. And maybe that's what you did when you became the CEO, but we'll get to that in a minute. So you're speaking to me from Montana right now, correct?
I am.
And, I was just there. I think I mentioned that to you. I was outside of Bozeman, had a fantastic time, and pretty much fell in love with the state. But my wife told me I got to get home. So I went home.
But you have to come in January and you'll fall out of love pretty quickly.
I'm not coming in January unless we're skiing. That would be okay. When I was in Bozeman, a guy said to me that it's kind of like Bosangeles. Have you ever heard that phrase before?
Yeah, Montanans have a couple jokes about Bozeman. One is calling it Bosangeles. which is a term Bozeman has had at least the last 30 years. And the other one is, I like Bozeman. It's right near Montana.
So I didn't quite get it because I'm such an outsider, but I think that helps frame it for me a little bit. And what part of Montana are you in?
Well, I live in south central Montana, west of Billings, about 12 miles. Billings is the largest city, that's in quotes, town in Montana. And I grew up in southwest Montana, south of the capital city, also a town of Helena, Montana. I actually grew up in the Elkhorn Mountains, not in a town. So I kind of was raised by wolves and,
Now I
grew
understand
up
you.
foraging and things like that.
Now I have a better picture of really who you are. So obviously I shared a lot about your bio, but you are clearly into physician leadership and you have uncovered perhaps an exceptional way to view this. So we're going to get inside your head about this to help our listeners with this skill development. You ready for my questions?
I'll just say it's a scary place inside my head, but I'll do my best to make it digestible and halfway relatable for people that are listening.
Hey, we got a theme, Montana is a strange place and your brain and your mind is a scary place too. So it's all coming together very
All
quickly
right.
here.
Scary
All right,
Larry Dawn, bring it, baby.
So let's go ahead and start with the basics, right? So people around us and maybe people we're close to say that all physicians either lead or are leaders, or this generic phrasing like all physicians lead, right? But we as going through UME and GME, we don't really get trained in leadership. That's rare unless we've been in the military or some other career. And I don't believe that every physician should lead, much less take on an executive role, because we're not all wired for this stuff. But you did something remarkable and rare. You served as a senior physician executive in a clinical role at the Billings, and then later as a CEO. And these roles are completely different from each other and completely different from practicing medicine, right?
Well, I would say yes and no, but keep
Go
going with
for
your
it.
question. So I would say that we hear that a lot, right? If you're going to be a physician leader, it's a lot different than being a doctor. Okay, I get it, right? I was an emergency physician for years, and when I was in the ED, the technical skill set required for that job was certainly different than the technical skill set required to be a CEO or CMO. I get that. That is true. It doesn't stop there, though. There's I like to say maybe one of the first rules of healthcare is improv, right? Yes, or just say yes and keep linking. I have a little bit different twist on that. I certainly am going to say that if you're a physician, let's just call it a pure clinical, undomesticated, free range, pure doctor, right?
Like the bison that
Untainted.
I kept running
Exactly.
into.
Yeah, untainted by all the things that dent us in the head in healthcare, patients, families, doctors, nurses alike, right? If you're one of those individuals, you cannot walk up and become a CMO by putting out your shingle as a placard on your desk or be a CEO. Not possible.
Right.
That said, the thoughtful physician realizes that he or she carries within themselves a way of understanding systems and the grocery list of words that modern business, not just healthcare, is now promulgating like as if it came out of the business, an MBA course, right? Resilience, agility, innovation, sustainability, elasticity, compliance. These actually are all biological words. They are not the words of geology, right? Rocks endure forever, but they do not adapt. So we carry in us, often without understanding it or stopping to think about it, at least the Rosetta Stone for translating a way of looking at things, systemic coordination, right? And all that entails, from the tiny micro interactions cell to cell or within a cell to organ systems and graft versus host disease and all these elegant things going on in the body and what happens when they break. That is highly, highly translatable into the leadership, executive, administrative realm, I believe, having been there myself. Some of the best work I ever did in my career, at least as others defined it, and I was always never quite sure was having a good day or bad day, was, hey, where did that come from? And I was kind of like, well, it's what the job is, right? And they're like, well, yeah, but where'd you learn that? And I remember hearing that question a fair amount of times and thinking, I know where I got that. I got that from
Where?
biology. I got that from biology. I got that from understanding what was happening at the bedside and then translating it.
So let me interrupt for a second, please. So, you do not have an MBA. That is correct?
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought I would need one and would set out to get one, but it just so happened I ended up in kind of a firestorm of a CEO role. And I asked the people that I was working with internally and externally, especially externally, do I need to go get an MBA? And they said, not anymore. Right. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea to have one or get one if you're interested in doing executive work. It just happens that I guess I got grandfathered in by a lot of fires.
Yeah, no, I mean, the on the job training, now you never want to be a real firefighter on the job. Like you actually do want to go to fire college for that. But, here's what I'm picking up. You must have some innate ability to take a frame, biology or, nature, and cast that into the responsibilities. As you said, rocks don't adapt of what these roles require. Not everybody can do that, Larry. I've worked with a lot of executives. I know you have too. That for some, it's very much a skilling process and even learning the language, right? In medicine, we use terms, or at least we used to, that nobody understood, which gave us that hierarchical power dynamic. We said things and knew things, and
Yeah.
we had to bring it to people. In
Yeah.
the executive
Made
world,
us really boring at barbecues, by the way, right? We're like the
yeah.
people no one wanted
Oh,
to talk
well,
to.
you were
What?
much more exciting because you could talk about emergency room disasters. When you talk to an oncologist at a party, everybody goes the other way. I guarantee
Yeah,
that.
cell lysis isn't nearly as much fun as knife and gun stories. I get it.
That is true. So anyway, you have a sense of the language, agility, adaptability, innovation that business leaders use us throughout our language now, but we weren't trained that way as physicians. So did you use any other frames beyond biology to begin to think about the
Yeah, I
differences
mean,
in how to prep?
I think, first of all, I'd like to say, you were awfully nice with some of the things you said about me. I had years of development. I was in an organization that specifically wanted to develop physician executives, right? So I had that context around me. I had a lot of, I guess, formal leadership development training.
Is
I
that at
found
the
it all
Billings? Is that at the
at
Billings?
Billings Clinic. I had that, yeah, and then I had it just even before that, right? I mean, I would like to say that leadership development works. It's a long arc, right? It doesn't turn you into something overnight. I don't think it works as well as it could. And I think there's a lot sometimes that we're missing. We're often, in my opinion, developing leaders for yesterday's world rather than developing the leadership we need for right now and
So we'll
tomorrow.
get to that. We'll get
Yep.
to hold that thought. So that's very
Well, you asked
important.
about frames. I
Yeah.
was asked once by a new employee. I used to really enjoy going and welcoming new employees to our organization, which at that time we were doing every 2 weeks. And, two, three, 4 dozen people, whatever it was. Um, And one of the things that I used to ask them were, what questions do you have for me? And one young nurse asked once, she said, what do you think is the most important skill in your job? I thought that was a really interesting question. And I remember flipping it around to them and getting their list. And it was interesting. Their new employee list was certainly interesting to me and important, but it wasn't my list. My list was the most important skill I had was the ability to speak and listen in multiple different languages. And I think every physician knows this, right? You may be telling, in your case, Lee, a plumber or an electrician that he or she have cancer for the first time, right? And even though they're seeing an oncologist, it hasn't hit them yet, right? They saw
Mhm.
someone in the ER who saw something on a scan, who sent them somewhere, or you may be talking to someone with Down syndrome who has a lymphoma and is, or maybe a tax attorney. I mean, in other words, physicians have the unique advantage, humbling privilege, and frankly, frustration of seeing people from all walks of life in all states of mind at any given time. And our job is to create a bridge. I mean, and the bridge is technical, right? Like what's going on? What's your data? What do we do here? What's the diagnosis? What are the treatment options? What's informed consent? It's also, though, human to human interface. And to the extent that we can create that well, we're, quote, a good doctor, or it's a good clinical encounter for the patient and the family and for us. So that I just sort of viewed that as the ultimate frame. As a CMO or CEO, I was a physician on taking care of the organization. Could I do everything? Could I write a prescription and just whip it off and say, take 2 of these and call me in the morning like the old joke goes? No, never works. And at the same time, I had to think, how do I create a bridge here that allows all these combinations of people to optimize their ability to do their individual jobs, their collaborative person to person jobs, and then to work across different teams and disciplines. And that to me was very much being a doctor, but using a different and additional set of tools and languages.
I couldn't agree with you more. We'll give a little commentary though. I think that emergency medicine physicians, particularly the good ones, and that's where my commentary will go in a second, have to establish the bridge, and I will say of trust in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
You don't have you have longitudinal patients that come back again with their chronic illnesses, their CHF, their behavioral health. You see them, you get to know them. But in an oncology practice, it's very longitudinal and they are very scared, and we have to
Yeah.
work on the trust, or they're not going to hear anything, and there will be no effective information exchange at all until we
Yeah.
get them in that mode of that bridge space that you're talking about.
And this goes to your fire chief title even, right? So I used to say one of my jobs in emergency medicine was what I called 30 seconds to meaningful rapport. And in a way, that's what the fire chief CMO thing is, right? I mean, whatever the fire is, whatever bank, as a colleague of mine used to call it, you have is handy, but the trust that you have or create in the moment in the fire has to work right then. And are there principles? Yes. Is there sort of antecedent reputation and collegial connection? Yes. But still, the thing about fires is they blow everything up, right? They burn everything down. And in a way, you're always starting over in a fire in addition to building or whatever you have walking in. So I think that's
Yeah.
an accurate comment.
And my commentary is, I'll say this out loud and I'll get blasted on social media. Not every physician is actually good at this. They're apprentice, they're taught, you're interned and you're a resident, and you see great models and mentors. But sometimes you have a bad model, or sometimes you just don't have the capability of establishing that rapport and trust. And so not every, again, it goes back to not everybody can do everything we're talking about, number one. Number two, you also can't walk into the boardroom like it's an emergency room. It is a totally different pacing involved, and there's a
Yeah.
culture involved. So to your earlier point, we know how to do it. We just have to ratchet back a little bit, or reframe it a little bit to know what's the environment to apply these skills. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. And I'll add one more thing, which is I think that when physicians put on the expert hat too much, we say we know, right? Now, is there a time when you, as an oncologist, or I, as an emergency physician, do know and people depend on us to know? Absolutely. I am not negating that or disavowing that at all. But I think the really great physicians are learners, right? They learn from every patient, every colleague, every mistake they make, every paper they read. And they're not just learning to know more, they're also learning and grounding themselves in a greater sense of curiosity, humility, and that there is more there. So they stay, they're always sensing, right? And I think as you move into leadership, the physician who prides him or herself on being the expert and knowing everything runs into more blind alleys than one who says, yeah, sure, I bring things to the table, right? There are things I can do that may be unique in this room or in this organization or this population. And I know other people are walking in with that too. I may not know exactly what their unique contribution is, but my curiosity and humility as a learner, again, a physician, an ancient physician quality, I would say, and one that our modern process drums out of us too much for my taste. But if you look at really good physicians understand the power of learning and curiosity and humility and knowing I'm going to see a patient today who's had a lymphoma I've seen, I don't know, 450 times before, but I also know this one's going to be a little bit different because that's the game we're in. It's all
Yeah.
the same and it's all different. And I think they migrate that into their leadership realm, and that allows them a kind of personal and professional currency that is rare, because generally we teach people to lead, especially the higher you go and the bigger you go. You're supposed to, there's a myth, right? That you're supposed to know the answers, know everything, and tell people what to do. And actually, I would invert that and say the quote, higher you go, the more capable you have to be at scaling humility, curiosity, and empathy. And people say, yeah, they go, come on, man. We're talking about results and hard dollars and metric. I'm like, yeah, I get it. That's the whole game with the patient too, right? I want them to get better, get married 10 years from now, and never think about me again. I want to literally disappear, but you can't get to that level of, you know, sort of being in the background unless you can create results. And so the
I
results and the humility are paired.
totally appreciate this. And I not only is it inversely proportional, it's exponential. The higher
Yeah.
you go, the more curiosity you need, the greater listening. I think that's brilliant and insightful. And I'm going to flip this a little bit because you hinted at it. And before we get to like the future of medicine and future preparation, you've mentioned a couple times thinking about systems and complexity when we spoke before, and you have begun to broaden your thinking, not just how the individual leader moves from a clinical experience into the boardroom or the executive room, but you've thought a lot about that higher level systems. What drew you to that space? How did you get there?
Well, we all have things we remember from our parents. And my dad, who's, in his, he's 86 now, whatever that is, 80s, mid 80s or early, late 80s, whatever.
Somewhere between
Yeah, yeah.
79 and 89.
He's at the point now where we don't get to have the same depth of conversations that we used to. And I'm remembering from my dad, who also was a physician and grew up with the phone ringing 24/7, some of the things he said to me. And one of the things he once said about me, and I didn't think of myself this way as I was a kid, said, you're kind of the ultimate pragmatist. And so when you say, where'd I get into this whole system complexity stuff? I'm after what works, right? I mean, if I'm seeing a patient or we're a team of people seeing a patient, what do we really want? We want what works for the patient. And sometimes that's what we know. Sometimes what we don't know. Sometimes it's a phone call to the CDC or to the cardiologist upstairs. But life is a scavenger hunt to find out what we need to know in order to get done what we need to get done. And that's always how I looked at it. So as a physician, as a clinical physician, young in my career and increasingly as I got more seasoned, certainly as an administrative leader, an executive or whatever, department chair, whatever the term was, my thought was kind of like Roy Scheider on as Chief Brody in Jaws. I'm like, we need a bigger boat. Like
Yeah.
there's too much to get done
Yeah.
for all of us eager beaver achievers. And let's face it, we're raised that way, right? We're raised on a short leaf, kept hungry and said, run, dog, run. And we get good at that. That, by the way, notable and impressive skill, but it's insufficient to win the math of how much needs to get done and the resources we have, whether the resources are human energy, psychic or metabolic, money, FTEs, equipment, technology. We need a bigger boat. So early on in my career, I was like, man, this idea of getting individually good or even lacing together 4 or 5 people or 20 or 100 and saying, be really good and try really hard, didn't look like it was working. And I thought, what creates profound capacity? And biological systems create capacity. They store fat in our bodies, for example, right? Our bodies right now are loaded with glycogen and ATP. They are ready to go. They have siege and surge capacity. The healthier you are, the more of that you have, right? Whether you're a Tour de France athlete or a young single mom who can tolerate a high ISS score on a trauma and be okay versus a rickety 78-year-old with COPD, renal failure, heart failure, diabetes, and strokes. They get the same injury. One's going to crumple a lot faster. So it was really my quest for capacity. How do you create an environment where more can get done easier for longer and people will still keep coming back? That really got me thinking about systems. And then I started thinking about systems. You run into some really creative, interesting thinkers around the world, deceased and present, and their writings. And also you start thinking, you know what, these people are describing the OS of systemness in the living world, and that is biology. There's a reason why you can cut the liver in half or 4 pieces or 10, take most of it away and it will regenerate, right? Our bodies have both just-in-time inventory thinking as well as redundancy and anti-fragility, don't let it crash sort of stuff built in. And I started thinking, if we were going to lead this way, whether it was as a department or throughput in an ED or whatever the millions of things we do in healthcare, how would you create that kind of capacity? And that's kind of what started geeking me out a long time ago.
Well, I think that's, again, awfully insightful. I don't live in this space or think about it, but my light bulbs, you can see the light bulbs going off over my head, right? So you wrote about a lot of, or some of this anyway, the intersection of complexity and systems in your book. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write it, what you hope to accomplish.
Yeah.
What were you trying to do with that?
Well, I guess the problem I was trying to address or solve was, I guess, the fact that I looked around, and no disrespect to anybody personally, I think there are some absolutely dynamite leaders out there, just amazing people I've met in my life. So I met a lot, and I continue to meet a lot of just really dynamite leaders. But what I sensed was there aren't enough of them in the right places for my taste. And so I thought we really need leaders who are capable of creating exponential action the right way, right in the right places. And we need more leaders like that. And we need to start understanding that leadership is certainly a top-down skill and art. But if the only axis you're working is top-down, you're not going to get to that capacity I'm after. So I started thinking about how biology does things from the bottom up, right? I mean, when you and I first arrived in the universe as a zygote, we didn't have a whole lot of capacity. And
I did, but
you were a
suit
genius
yourself.
zygote, right? super brilliant Lee, the super zygote. I was like a dumb zygote, right? I mean, it's like a little floating package of DNA bobbing in.
You evolved. I got
exactly.
stuck. Yeah.
So you say, how does that happen? How does biology do things? Well, first it's, let's take a bunch of little things and lace them together. And as we get more and more mass, let's differentiate and connect. And then you get to this sort of systemic elegance. So I started thinking biology is usually working from the small to the big and from bottom up. And I got really interested in the idea that if you were going to create exponential effects, solve the math, get more done, you had to not abandon what we know about leadership, right? That if be good in your position and be able to lead well from your position and top down. But computers a long time ago just stopped thinking about workstations as the thing, right? The cloud is the thing, right? And the cloud ecosystem and architecture, that's where the power is. And I started thinking that way about leadership, and epidemics do that, right? You may not like what an epidemic does to you, right? Ebola epidemics are not good, and the pandemic showed us a whole lot of direct and indirect effects of epidemic action. But I started thinking, from a leadership perspective, if you could start thinking of yourself as conjuring up a cloud of infection, conversion, and contagion around the right kind of things that multiplied capability in a group, 500, 5,000, 50,000. Now you're creating real leverage and you're not wearing yourself out or the other participants out. Because when you look at epidemics, what gets worn out is the target. But the organisms themselves are just multiplying at sort of a sustainable homeostatic pace. It's not like we're asking coronavirus or influenza or measles to just redline it, right? Just redline it for a while and then you'll be okay. And in the human world, and certainly particularly in healthcare, we try to move organizations by redlining humans, right? So go, mainline your caffeine, don't get sleep. You just got to try hard. And we even hear this lexicon, this frame when leaders get out in front of people. And I get to watch a fair amount of leaders out in front of their folks. And it kind of sounds like this. Hey, healthcare is hard and it's exhausting and we have to do this and it's just what we got to do. And so let's just muscle up and just get it done. Like, whoa, that's a recipe for joy, right? I mean, and I know every physician or clinician, even PA, nurse, whoever's listening to this knows what that's like. We train to go without sleep, without peeing, without eating, without seeing our kids. We know that drill. We're good at it. Very handy skill. But if you're going to revolutionize healthcare or run a department or see thousands of patients or impact patient population health or redo healthcare's business model, you need more than just try hard, really hard, don't go down. And even if that were adequate, you're not going to get 99% of the people to work that hard, last very long, and not burn out. So metabolically, it becomes a stupid strategy. And I started looking at epidemics and saying, hey, they mobilize a lot of particles to mobilize a lot of particles to mobilize a lot of things. They may create things like DIC and hemorrhagic fever and all these sorts of things that we don't like. But the way that they work has some wisdom we could learn from. And I say that as a doc who has redlined my whole life too, right? I know how to go hard and fry myself just like we all do.
Yeah, I had this awakening when I read this study, which is quoted 1,000 trillion million times, that medical knowledge is doubling every 74 days. Now, this is sort of a extraction concept. It wasn't actually measured. I believe our computer systems could actually measure that today. But when I read that, I thought, we're screwed. There is no human way to keep up with this. And this is before large learning and language modeling and all of the kind of exponential pattern recognition that's going on and data assessment. So when that knowledge gap was increasing, we weren't doing a damn thing about it on a day-to-day treadmill. They just kept turning up the speed, and nobody thought about
Yeah.
you cannot keep up anymore. Now, with that in mind, I want to go back to your concept of exponential leadership. In our academy, we teach the classic modeling: servant leader, influence leader, transactional leader, charismatic leader. So now I have a new term, exponential leader. But I'm wondering if that is a leader type or a leader tactic or technique. So a leader isn't a leader till he makes a leader who makes another leader. That's kind of what I'm hearing you say. But is it something we do, or is it the type of leader we are? I'm trying to sort that in my head. Help me out here.
Well, let's say this. You could be a number of types of leaders and you could scale that typology in a population, right? So not every type of leadership is as scalable. So let's take narcissism, for example. Lots of narcissistic leaders out there, some famous, some not. Does that scale? Not really, because for two reasons. Narcissists themselves are already migrating toward a point of origin and an end point of one, right? So that
Right.
sort of blows up the scaling right there. Second of all, the ways that narcissists relate to themselves and others don't multiply as well in populations as some other things. You can multiply anger in a population very well. It's easy to do, right? You can multiply compassion and empathy in a population, harder to do, but longer lasting and has more multiple effects, right? So I guess to answer the way you framed the question, I think thinking exponentially as a leader, thinking epidemically is to think, how can whatever assets are in the population, right? You're almost thinking like gene dissemination, right? Maybe I bring, I don't know, let's just pick some really micro fundamentals, right? Let's say I bring listening to the table and you bring humility to the table and someone else brings sort of process design to the table. The idea is not to replicate across every individual all of those skills in everybody. It's to say, how do we create the network and the ecosystem so that we can tap whatever metabolic resource we need, process design plus patient centrism plus humility plus nursing acumen, and mix and match whenever you want and get it to diffuse in the system.
So
Right?
you just answered so that was very helpful. Thank you for that, because I had made the bold claim, not everybody really is a leader in medicine, nor should they go for leadership roles. But what you're saying is, yeah, but they have other skills that we can leverage. And
Right.
so there's no ones, we don't want the Clone Wars. We want that network of capability and leveraging all of that uniqueness until the ecosystem thrives, right?
Right. Right. And as an
Okay.
oncologist, you know this, right? I mean, a monoclonal multiplication in the body is cancer, which leads to death, right? It displaces that native biodiversity. I guess I was raised in the school that becoming a leader meant becoming continually all things, right? This is a good thing if you're trying to get individually better as a leader. It's a journey you should never get off of, but let's face it, you're never done. It's like being a parent or a doctor. When do you say, I'm done being a parent because I'm perfect, or a doctor because I know everything? We're done. That's arrogance, not success,
Yeah.
right?
I have
And
claimed I'm done being a parent, not because I'm perfect, but for
because you're
other
done.
for other reasons. But that's beside the point. Okay.
Yeah, so it's
Excellent
really about
discussion.
accessing resource
Yeah,
and
I get it.
multiplying that resource whenever and wherever. Within you, yes, but also everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
even getting that multiplying idea to multiply.
Yeah. Totally.
Because now
So,
you're nonlinear. These big problems you can now tackle without getting exhausted.
all right. Now, you had mentioned to me about your reworking of never let the crisis go to waste. You have a very
Yeah,
unique
yeah, yeah.
perspective on the value and the value add. It's transformational fulcrum in a system or in a complex environment. So talk to us a little bit about crises as a vehicle for positive change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's just start with the hierarchies embedded in that statement, because we've all heard it, right? Never waste a crisis. And I think the most primitive Machiavellian level, and I'm not saying there's no utility to this, but it's just to extract whatever you want out of the crisis. It's kind of egotistically driven. And I'll use a horrifying example from today. As we're taping this in Minneapolis at my residency alma mater, they had a mass shooting today, right? Someone shot up a bunch of kids in a school, happened to be a Catholic school, and then killed himself in the parking lot. I don't even know all the details. Terrible thing. We see it too much. A lot of the terrible things we see these days. But if you're looking at this idea of never wasting a crisis and you're a gun control advocate, you say, aha, and you use it for that, right? If you're worried about violence against children, you use it that way, right? If you're worried about what's going on in our society where we're prone more and more to violence, you use it that way. If you're a security and safety person, you say, aha, this is why we need bulletproof windows, right? If you're worried about oppression of Christians or religions around the world, you say, this happened in a parochial school. So that version of never waste a crisis is when something bad happens, use it as leverage for your agenda. And again, they're sort of maybe malicious or manipulative or, less than honorable ways to do that. And there are probably some honorable ways to do it. I'm simply saying that there's a next level, which is, okay, let's use it to learn, right? This may not be fun to be going through this fire, this crisis, but we can use it to get better. I like that, but also it has a tendency almost to sound a little bit namby-pamby Pollyanna, and I think it also diminishes the duress that people are under in a crisis. Kind of like, hey, smile, it's making you better. It's like, okay, that feels good. And what I started thinking about when I was an exec and we had lots of crises was this exponential idea with regard to crisis management. In other words, I don't have the luxury as a CEO or as a physician leader to not get multiple returns off this one action, because this crisis is probably creating multiple bad effects. Some visible right now, some are going to show up next week. Some may be latent in our system, right? This kind of PTSD stuff. And I need to find more positive answers here than negative ones, numerically speaking. So I started thinking about a crisis and have ever since, not just as an opportunity, but an opportunity that should have multiple positive return dimensions. Can this help us with performance? The answer better be yes. Let us count the ways. Can this help us with how we learn and adjust and respond now and for the future? Yes, let's define those ways. Can this help us with our vitality? No, like the only vitality return here is we survive and don't die and don't screw up. Okay, there may be more than that, right? Let's think about how we can devise multiple returns at the performance level, the learning level, and the vitality level. So as we manage this crisis, we become better than ever, more capable of handling the next crisis, and less brittle, right? That's what I wanted out of every crisis. Sounds a little abstract, but we literally used to do this with our team, right? We're not just going to survive this or not die. We're going to turn this into a multiple return situation.
So I'm going to make yet another big, bold, hairy claim on this show. And
are you still on all physicians aren't leaders? Are we settled that way?
No, this is ego puffing. So my big, bold claim here is that this podcast, which was derived from the notion of crisis leadership for chief medical officers, has the potential to be a force multiplier to tell whoever listens, who is in this role or wants to be in this role, how to approach certain things that come their way that they didn't know was coming their way, they didn't ask for it. So I'm wondering if that it meets this definition of a force multiplier, that this is a medium for expanding people's perspectives.
Yeah, I would say, your podcast, right, Lee? But in the world we live in, if you think about the demands on CMOs and on clinicians and on the clinician administrative interface in healthcare, why not? I mean, yeah, turn everything into a force multiplier. Podcasts are great ways to do it. We have access to tools now that can be vectors of enormously infectious, high potential ideas. Bad people are already doing that, right? People are trafficking in terrorism, misinformation, manipulation. They're not doctors trying to help things be healthier. We need to get really good at this stuff in a good way for good reasons toward good effect. So yeah, I don't know, I would just say, yeah, go brother, don't stop, multiply on, do it more, right? I hope your audience swells to 10 million, clinicians and more, wondering why are doctors not boring people spouting bad jokes and Latinate terms we don't understand and no one wants to listen to them at barbecues. where do these physicians all of a sudden become so relatable and so connective and helping us drive every dimension of our society because these crazy clowns decided that health seems to reside in nooks and crannies far beyond the exam room, and now here they are.
Well, you heard it, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Larry McEvoy proclaiming that we're going to hit 10 million listeners. And I just want to tell you, this is going to be a great wrap for part one. So everybody stay tuned. We're going to wrap this one up, and we're going to come back for part two next week. So I thank you for listening. You have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. And if you want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO, check out our website, thefirechiefcmo.com, and connect with me, particularly on LinkedIn. I love these conversations, and I love talking with chief medical officers and physician leaders who want to prepare us for the next crisis. On the next show, we're going to hear more about the future and how Dr. McEvoy is preparing us for that future. So go out there, be a chief, and in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.